There is a man I want you to think about. He wakes up at 3 of the morning. He answers emails before his coffee goes cold. He works a full 8-hour shift, sometimes 10, sometimes 12. He drives for Uber on the weekends. He listens to business podcasts during every commute. He takes online courses at night. He posts motivational quotes about the grind on his social media. He is, by every visible measurement, the hardest working person you have ever met. And yet, at 50 years old, he has less than $8,000 in savings. He has no assets. He has 3 missed paychecks from disaster. He is exhausted in a way that sleep cannot fix. And somewhere deep behind his eyes, behind the hustle and the grind and the 5 alarm clock, there is a quiet terror that whispers the same question every night before he falls asleep. Why isn't it working? I want to answer that question today. Not with motivation, not with a list of habits or morning routines. I want to answer it with physics. I want to answer it with mathematics. Because what is destroying this man's financial life is not laziness. It is not lack of effort. It is not bad luck or a broken economy or a rigged system. What is destroying him is something far more insidious. It is the activity trap, and there is a very good chance it is destroying you too. Most people have been taught a simple equation since childhood. The equation goes like this: effort equals results. Work harder, get more. Put in the hours, earn the reward. This equation feels true. It feels morale. It feels fair. The entire structure of school, of employment, of modern culture is built on this equation. But in the world of wealth, this equation is a lie. Not a partial lie, not a slight exaggeration. A complete and fundamental falsehood that keeps the working class running in circles until they collapse. Here is the equation that actually governs wealth. Leverage equals results. Not effort, leverage. And the activity trap is what happens when a person substitutes effort for leverage and spends an entire lifetime being very, very busy building absolutely nothing. Let me explain this with a simple image. Imagine 2 men standing in front of a forest. The first man has an axe. He is remarkable. He swings it harder than anyone you have ever seen. He wakes up early. He stays late. He sharpens his axe every morning. He is the most disciplined axe swinger in the history of lumber. Over the course of his career, he cuts down perhaps 10,000 trees. He is celebrated. He is praised. He is tired. The second man spends his first year not swinging at all. He reads. He thinks. He builds something that looks, from the outside, like laziness. He builds a sawmill, a system, an engine that cuts trees while he sleeps, while he eats, while he sits in a chair reading more books. Over the course of his career, his sawmill cuts down 10 million trees. The first man was busy. The second man was wealthy. This is the activity trap. It seduces you with the feeling of progress while systematically preventing you from ever achieving it. It is the most sophisticated cage ever built because the prisoner builds it himself, brick by brick with his own sweat. Today, I want to take this trap apart. I want to show you the exact mechanisms that keep it locked, and I want to show you the specific key that opens the door. Let us begin with the first mechanism. I call it the dopamine of effort. Human beings are the only creatures on earth who can suffer from the illusion of productivity. A beaver builds a dam. It does not confuse the act of carrying sticks with the completion of the dam. It does not feel accomplished until the water is held back. The beaver has no ego. It has no social audience. It has only the outcome. But you are not a beaver. You are a human being, and your brain is wired to reward the feeling of working, regardless of whether that work is producing anything of value. This is not a character flaw. It is evolutionary biology. For hundreds of thousands of years, human survival was directly correlated with physical effort. If you were moving, If you were hunting, if you were building, you were surviving. The brain developed a system to reward this movement to make you feel good about the act of exertion itself. It releases dopamine when you are busy. It makes you feel important when your calendar is full. It gives you a chemical high when you cross something off a list. This system kept your ancestors alive. It is killing your financial future. Because in the modern economy, the most valuable activities are almost never the ones that feel like work. They are the ones that feel like thinking, like waiting, like reading, like doing nothing for long enough to see something clearly. The activity trap exploits this evolutionary mismatch. It floods your brain with the dopamine of effort and tricks you into mistaking motion for momentum. You feel like you are building wealth because you are exhausted. You feel like you are making progress because your schedule is impossible. You feel like you deserve success because you have sacrificed so much. But feeling deserving and actually compounding are two entirely different things. The market does not care about your sacrifice. It does not reward your effort. It rewards only your outcomes. When I sit in my office in Omaha and read for 6 hours without returning a phone call, without attending a meeting, without generating any visible activity whatsoever, most people would look at that scene and think, I am wasting time. They would be wrong. That reading is not rest. It is the most productive thing I do. It is the fuel that powers every decision, every allocation, every outcome that follows. But because it looks like stillness, because it does not feel like hustle, the modern world has new category for it. The modern world calls it laziness. The modern world is broke. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician and philosopher, said something 300 years ago that I believe is the single most accurate diagnosis of financial failure ever written. He said, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Think about that. All of them, not some, all. Because when you cannot sit quietly, you fill the silence with activity. You check your phone, you schedule another meeting, you start another project, you answer emails that do not matter. You attend events that do not move you forward. You spend your most valuable cognitive hours, the hours when your brain is sharpest, doing things that feel urgent but are not important. And all of that activity, every single second of it, is preventing you from doing the one thing that would actually change your life, thinking. This is the first lock on the activity trap. The dopamine of effort convinces you that busyness is virtue. It makes you feel guilty about stillness. It makes patience feel like failure. But in the game of compounding, patience is not passivity. Patience is violence. It is the most aggressive weapon in the arsenal of the wealthy. Every day that you hold a great asset instead of trading it, you are performing an act of financial brutality against everyone who panicked and sold. Every hour that you sit and think instead of busying yourself with noise, you are separating yourself from the masses at a cellular level. You must retrain your brain to find pleasure in stillness, to get your dopamine from watching numbers grow silently rather than from the frantic movement of activity. This is the first escape from the trap. But there is a second mechanism, and it is more dangerous. I call it the substitution of visible for valuable. Let me ask you a question that might be uncomfortable. If you added up every hour you spent last month being productive, could you honestly say that more than 2 of those hours produced anything that will still have value in 10 years? Most people, if they answer with total honesty, will say no. Not because they are lazy, because they are spending their time on the visible rather than the valuable. The visible includes responding to emails immediately, attending meetings, appearing busy in front of colleagues, posting about your work on social media, keeping your desk organized, showing up early, staying late. The visible is everything that makes you look like you are contributing, everything that earns you praise in the short term. The valuable is the work that nobody sees, nobody prizes, and nobody schedules. It is the slow acquisition of a skill that will be worth 10 times your salary in 5 years. It is the reading of 500 annual reports until you understand one business so deeply that you can predict its behavior a decade from now. It is the long, uncomfortable thinking about which one direction out of 20 possible directions is worth your entire bet. The visible is social. The valuable is lonely. And because human beings are tribal creatures, because we are biologically driven to seek the approval of our social group, we will almost always choose the visible over the valuable. We will spend 4 hours in a meeting that could have been a 2-paragraph email because meetings feel productive and look busy and earn the nod from the boss. We will answer 67 emails in a day and feel accomplished, never noticing that none of those emails moved us 1 inch toward anything we actually care about. The activity trap is powered by this substitution. It lets you spend 40 years looking productive while building nothing. I want you to think about how the greatest fortunes in history were actually built. Andrew Carnegie did not build his steel empire by being the most active man in Pittsburgh. He built it by thinking very slowly and very deeply about which single position in the industrial economy of his era represented the maximum leverage. Then he bet everything on that one position and waited. John D. Rockefeller did not dominate the oil industry by trying everything. He dominated it by identifying the one thing that everyone else was ignoring, the transportation of oil rather than the drilling, and then controlling that one bottleneck with absolute focus. Charlie Munger, my partner, built his side of our intellectual partnership, not by attending conferences and staying current with every trend and reading every business newspaper every morning. He built it by reading so deeply in so many fields: biology, physics, psychology, history, that he constructed a latticey work of mental models that allowed him to see around corners that other people could not see around at all. None of these men were the buzziest in their field. They were the most focused. They were the most willing to ignore the visible in pursuit of the valuable. They were comfortable looking lazy to people who were actually losing. This is the second lock on the activity trap. The substitution of visible for valuable keeps you chasing the appearance of productivity rather than the substance of it. It fills your days with activity that generates applause but not assets. The escape from this lock requires a very specific and very uncomfortable practice. I call it the audit of irreplaceability. Once a week, you must look at everything you did in the preceding 7 days and ask a single brutal question. Could this have been done by someone else? Not could it have been done by someone smarter. Not by someone more experienced. By anyone. By a moderately capable person with access to the same information and tools you have. If the answer is yes, that activity is not your highest use. It may need to get done, but it should not be done by you. The wealthy are ruthless about this audit. They are constantly eliminating activities that do not require their specific, irreplaceable contribution. They build systems for the replaceable work and protect their hours for the irreplaceable thinking. The poor are the opposite. They do the replaceable work themselves because it feels safe, because it feels busy, because it fills the terrifying silence where the hard, irreplaceable thinking is supposed to happen. Every hour you spend doing what anyone could do is an hour stolen from what only you can do. Now let us talk about the third mechanism. This one operates beneath the surface, invisible until you know where to look. I call it the false ledger. Every person alive keeps 2 ledgers. The first is the one they show the world, the official ledger. The hours worked, the calls made, the deals attempted, the effort expended. This ledger is always impressive. It justifies the exhaustion. It explains why you deserve more than you have. The second is the one that actually governs your financial life, the invisible ledger. It tracks not what you did, but what those actions produced. Not the effort, but the compounding. not the motion, but the assets. Most people never look at the second ledger because the second ledger has a terrifying property. It does not care about effort. It does not reward suffering. It does not adjust its numbers based on how hard you tried or how early you woke up or how many side hustles you ran simultaneously. The second ledger asks only one question: did this action produce an asset? An asset, as my friend Robert Kiyosaki correctly identified before we ever met, is anything that puts money in your pocket while you sleep. A share of a business is an asset. A skill that commands premium pricing in the marketplace is an asset. A relationship with someone who opens doors you cannot open alone is an asset. A piece of intellectual property that earns royalties is an asset. Activity is not an asset. Effort is not an asset. Looking busy is not an asset. But here is where the false ledger does its most destructive work. Not just in the failure to count assets, but in the systematic miscounting of what substitutes for them. When you are deep in the activity trap, you develop a very specific accounting error. You begin to count time spent as equivalent to value produced. You say, "I worked 60 hours this week," and you mean it as evidence of progress. You say, "I answered 400 emails this month," and you mean it as proof of contribution. But the second ledger is cold and indifferent. It says, 60 hours doing what exactly? 400 emails producing which specific outcome? The tragedy is that the harder you work inside the activity trap, the further you often move from escape. Because the trap is not just about wasting time. It is about consuming the energy and attention that should be building assets and redirecting that energy into pure, frictionless, utterly barren activity. I have observed this phenomenon across every income level. I have watched men with six-figure salaries stay broke their entire lives because every dollar of that salary was immediately converted into the maintenance of a lifestyle designed to signal their productivity to the world. The expensive suit that signals they are serious, the luxury car that signals they have arrived, the corner office and the premium gym membership, and the corporate phone and the business class flights. All of these things, every single one, looks like evidence of success. Every single one is a liability. The wealthy man does not signal productivity. He produces. And then he accumulates in silence. Charlie Munger drove the same ordinary car for years while managing billions of dollars. He lives in the same house he has owned for decades. He does not have an image to maintain because he has a ledger to compound. These are not the same objective. If you are spending money to look successful, you are burning the fuel you need to become successful. This is the false ledger in action. It is accounting that makes you feel rich while making you poor. The escape from this lock is the most psychologically difficult of all three because it requires you to stop performing. It requires you to stop managing your external image and start managing your internal numbers. It requires you to accept a period of looking ordinary, of driving the old car and living in the smaller house and saying, "I'm doing okay, nothing exciting," when people ask, while behind the scenes, your invisible ledger is quietly, methodically accumulating the assets that will eventually make the conversation irrelevant. The wealthy do not perform success. They build it in the dark. Now let me give you the framework, the specific architecture of escape, the blueprint for dismantling the activity trap and replacing it with what I call the compounding engine. The compounding engine has 4 components. They are not complicated. They are not glamorous. They require no special talent or rare intelligence. They require only the discipline to apply them consistently over a long period of time while the world around you mistakes your patience for failure. The first component is the hierarchy of hours. Not all hours are equal. This is perhaps the most important truth about time management that no one in the productivity industry will tell you because it is not particularly sellable. It cannot be packaged into a morning routine or a productivity app. It is simply this: the hours when your cognitive capacity is at its peak are worth between 10 and 100 times more than the hours when it is depleted. Most people squander their peak hours on the visible work. They schedule their most difficult meetings, their most demanding colleagues, their most complex social obligations for the morning, because that is when they feel most capable of handling them. They are using their sharpest blade to cut through the easiest material. The result is that by the time they arrive at the genuinely valuable work, the thinking and the reading and the strategic analysis, they have no blade left. They are running on fumes, producing mediocre insight when they should be producing transformative clarity. The wealthy are different. The wealthy treat their peak cognitive hours as sacred, untouchable, unreachable by emails and meetings and social obligations. They reserve those hours exclusively for the activities that only they can do, the irreplaceable thinking that determines the direction of everything else. This requires saying no to people who want your best hours for their ordinary work. It requires disappointing people who expect immediate responses and constant availability. It requires the social courage to be perceived as difficult or unavailable or even arrogant. But this is not arrogance. This is the economics of attention. Your attention is the scarcest resource you possess. It is more valuable than your money, because money can be replaced, but the hour you spent answering emails that did not matter can never be recovered. It is gone forever, and whatever compounding it might have generated if spent on the valuable work will never happen. Guard your peak hours the way a bank guards its vault. Not because you are more important than the people asking for your time, but because the work you do in those hours will eventually benefit far more people than the work you would do by being perpetually available. The second component is the elimination engine. Warren Buffett has said many times that the difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no to almost everything. I want to explore why this is not just true, but mathematically necessary. Every yes you give costs two things. It costs the obvious thing, the time and energy required to fulfill the commitment. But it also costs the hidden thing, the alternative you cannot pursue because you are already committed elsewhere. Economists call this opportunity cost. I call it the invisible tax on busyness. When you say yes to the third business idea, you are not just committing the hours required to explore it. You are taxing the first two ideas of the attention they need to actually succeed. When you say yes to the fourth social obligation in a week, you are taxing the reading that would have compounded your knowledge. When you say yes to the investment you do not fully understand, you are taxing your capital and your confidence and your time when it inevitably underperforms. Every yes to something good is a secret no to something great. The elimination engine is the systematic practice of identifying what to say no to before you decide what to say yes to. It starts with a principle I have used my entire life without ever formally naming it until now. The principle is this: if it does not compound, it should not consume. If an activity, a relationship, a project, an investment does not have the potential to produce returns that grow over time, it should be allocated the absolute minimum of your finite resources, not zero necessarily. You must maintain your health and your relationships and your sanity, but the minimum, the baseline, not the premium hours, not the undivided focus, not the full depth of your capability. Reserve the compound hours for the compound activities. The third component is the leverage ladder. This is the mechanism by which you convert effort into systems and systems into assets. Most people live their entire financial lives on the first rung of the leverage ladder. The first rung is pure labor. 1 hour of your time produces 1 unit of income. You sell your time. You get paid. The transaction is complete, and you must repeat it tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, forever, or the income stops. The second rung of the leverage ladder is skill leverage. Here, you have developed a capability that the market values highly enough to pay a premium for your time. You are still selling hours, but each hour commands a higher price. A lawyer, a surgeon, a specialist of any kind is on the second rung. But the second rung has the same fundamental limitation as the first. Your income is still capped by your hours. Your ceiling is still defined by the number of hours in a day. You are still, at the deepest level, exchanging time for money. You are just getting a better exchange rate. The third rung is system leverage. Here you have built something, a business process, a piece of software, a documented methodology, a trained team, an investment portfolio that generates income without your direct participation. Your income is no longer capped by your hours because the system operates independently of your presence. The fourth rung is capital leverage. Here, money works for you at scale. Every dollar you have accumulated is deployed into productive assets that compound automatically. You wake up every morning richer than you were the night before without having done anything at all. This is what Albert Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world. Most people in the activity trap never climb past the first rung because the activity trap consumes all the time and energy they would need to build the mechanisms of the higher rungs. They are too busy doing the work to ever build the system that does the work. They are too exhausted from selling their time to ever accumulate enough capital to stop selling it. The escape requires a deliberate, intentional allocation of protected time to rung climbing activities. Not after you finish the rung one work, not on the weekends if you have anything left over, before. Before the email, before the meeting, before the visible work that consumes everything. Every morning for at least 1 hour, you work on the rung above you. You build the system. You acquire the skill. You study the investment. You write the code. You create the asset. 1 hour per day, protected absolutely from the demands of the lower rung, compounded over 5 years, will move you further than a decade of grinding at the same level ever could. The fourth component is what I call the patience premium. This is the most counterintuitive component, and in the current cultural environment, the most radical. In a world of instant gratification, in a world where a business is considered a failure if it has not achieved explosive growth within 18 months, in a world where investment returns are measured quarterly and attention spans are measured in seconds, the willingness to wait has become the rarest and most valuable competitive advantage available to the individual investor. The market pays extraordinary premiums for patience, not because waiting is inherently virtuous, but because almost no one can actually do it. Human beings are biologically wired for the immediate. We evolved in an environment where delayed gratification was rare and survival required constant responsiveness to the present threat. But the most powerful force in economics, compounding, is entirely dependent on time. It does not work over months. It barely works over years. It becomes transformative only over decades. My fortune was not made by being the smartest investor. There were smarter investors than me who went broke. My fortune was made by being the most patient investor. By understanding early in my life that the game of compounding is not won by the swiftest or the cleverest or the most active. It is won by the person who stays on the field the longest without making a catastrophic mistake. The patience premium is available to anyone. It requires no special intelligence, no privileged access, no exceptional talent. It requires only the discipline to leave the compounding machine running when every instinct and every external voice is screaming at you to do something. When the market dropped during the 2008 financial crisis, people who had been quietly building portfolios for years panic sold their positions at a fraction of their value. They were not irrational people. They were not stupid people. They were people who had not truly internalized the patient's premium. They did not trust the mathematics enough to endure the psychology. The people who held, or better still, who bought during those years when everyone else was selling, captured returns over the following decade that changed their lives. Not because they were smarter than the people who sold, because they were more patient. Patience is not passive. Patience is not acceptance of mediocrity or resignation to a slow life. Patience is the active, disciplined, intentional choice to trust the compound math over the emotional noise. It is perhaps the most aggressive financial strategy available to the ordinary investor. I want to tell you about a concept I think about often when I watch talented people destroying their own futures in the activity trap. I call it the velocity illusion. Velocity is the feeling of moving fast. The activity trap produces extraordinary velocity. You are always moving. You are always responding. You are always working on something. The velocity feels like progress. It generates the dopamine of effort. It satisfies the tribal need to appear productive. It justifies the exhaustion and the sacrifice and the relentlessness. But velocity without direction is not progress. It is the simulation of progress. A car driving at 200 kilometers per hour in the wrong direction is not winning the race. It is not almost winning the race. It is moving with maximum efficiency toward the wrong destination. The activity trap does not care about your direction. It only cares about your speed. And the faster you move inside it, the further you travel from where you actually need to go. The most important question you can ask about your financial life right now is not, how hard am I working? It is, which direction am I moving in? Every activity you engage in has a direction. It either moves you toward greater leverage, toward more assets, toward the compounding machine that eventually liberates you from the necessity of your own constant effort, or it moves you toward the maintenance of a current level of existence that requires your ongoing, exhausting, irreplaceable presence to sustain. The activity trap is the direction called maintenance. It is the direction of the treadmill. Enormous effort. Zero forward motion. The moment you stop running, you fall off. The wealthy are moving in a different direction, the direction of systems and assets and compounding. It looks slower at first. The early years are almost invisible in their results. The numbers are small, and the progress is imperceptible, and the people around you are buying nicer cars and taking better vacations, and you are quietly, patiently building a machine that nobody can see. But this is the nature of compounding. It is boring for a very long time, and then it is extraordinary. The first years are the hardest. The first years are where the activity trap catches most people, because when you leave the treadmill and start moving in the direction of assets, the velocity drops. You slow down, you appear to be doing less, the visible work diminishes, the busyness decreases, the social signals quiet, and everyone around you interprets this as failure. They say, "You used to be so driven. You used to work so hard. What happened? Have you given up?" No. You have upgraded your direction. You have traded velocity for trajectory. You have traded the feeling of progress for the mathematics of it. You have made the single most important shift available to a person in the working years of their financial life. And now the compounding machine is running. Let us talk about the social dimension of the activity trap, because this is the layer that makes it most difficult to escape. The activity trap is not just a personal psychology, it is a cultural one. We live in a civilization that has organized itself around the mythology of the grind. Every culture celebrates its workers. Every religion prizes industriousness. Every mentor tells their student to work harder and get up earlier and push further. The grind is moral. The grind is virtuous. The grind is the narrative through which ordinary people become extraordinary. And I do not want to tell you that hard work does not matter. It does. The early stages of any wealth-building journey require an enormous, uncomfortable, relentless expenditure of effort and sacrifice. You cannot skip the accumulation phase. You cannot leverage your way to the first $20,000. You must earn it through sheer, grinding, unglamorous work. But the mythology of the grind becomes a trap the moment it tells you that more effort is always the answer. The moment it convinces you that the reason you are not further ahead is that you are not working hard enough. Because at a certain point, which most people reach far earlier than they realize, the limiting factor is not your effort, it is your direction. The social pressure to remain in the activity trap is enormous. Your colleagues will question you if you leave early. Your family will worry if you stop grinding. Your friends will call you lazy if you stop filling your schedule. The entire cultural apparatus around you is optimized for the production of visible effort, not the accumulation of invisible assets. This is why I have always said that the inner scorecard matters more than the outer one. If you are making decisions based on how your choices look to the people around you, you will always be pulled back into the activity trap. Because the activity trap looks right to observers. It looks like virtue. It looks like responsibility. It looks like you are doing what you are supposed to do. The compounding path looks wrong. It looks like you are slowing down, like you are becoming comfortable, like you are not hungry enough. You must be able to look at your invisible ledger, at the numbers that nobody else can see, and trust what it tells you, even when the entire visible world is telling you the opposite. This is perhaps the most difficult human feat in the financial domain. Not the mathematics of compounding, not the discipline of saving, the psychological independence to pursue an invisible strategy in a world that rewards visible effort. But this is where the game is won or lost. Not in the spreadsheet, in the psychology. Now I want to address something directly. You may be watching this and thinking, Warren, this is all well and good for people who already have money, but I am barely surviving. I cannot afford to stop grinding. I cannot afford to be patient. I cannot afford to think when there are bills due tomorrow. And you are right. In the early survival phase, the activity trap is not the enemy. Survival requires hustle. When you have nothing, effort is the only currency you have to spend. The grind is necessary. The second job is necessary. The relentless accumulation of that first buffer is necessary. I have never argued otherwise. But I want you to understand something important about the survival phase. It has a purpose and it has an exit. The purpose of the survival phase is to accumulate the first buffer, the cognitive safety net that allows you to stop operating in pure reaction mode and begin operating in strategic mode. That first buffer, whatever number represents 3 to 6 months of your basic expenses, is not a destination. It is a launch pad. The moment you have that buffer, the rules change. The moment you have that buffer, staying in the activity trap is no longer a necessity. It becomes a choice, and it becomes an expensive one. The tragedy I have observed across decades of watching ordinary people and their financial lives is that most people never notice when the survival phase ends. They accumulate the buffer, and then, instead of shifting strategy, they simply increase the speed of the same treadmill. They spend the buffer on lifestyle upgrades that require more grinding to maintain. They upgrade the car and the apartment and the subscriptions and the social obligations, and the grind expands to fill the new space. They mistake the elevation of lifestyle for the elevation of wealth. They mistake the consumption of their buffer for the production of assets. The wealth gap between the person who uses the buffer to exit the activity trap and the person who uses the buffer to expand their lifestyle is not 10% or 20% over a lifetime. It is total. It is the difference between financial independence and financial perpetual servitude. It is the difference between having options and having obligations. So if you are in the survival phase, grind, build the buffer, do what must be done. But the moment the buffer exists, Stop and ask yourself this one question. What is the smallest change in direction that would start moving me toward leverage? Not the biggest change, not the dramatic pivot, the smallest. The 1 hour per day that is permanently allocated to the rung above you. The $100 per month into the index fund that you never touch. The one skill that you build slowly over 18 months that commands a premium in the market. Small direction changes, compounded over time, produce destinations that are unrecognizable from the starting point. I want to end with a story about a force that most people underestimate. In 1962, scientists at NASA were calculating the trajectory for a spacecraft they intended to send to Mars. The math required to hit a target millions of kilometers away, moving at thousands of kilometers per hour, from a launch platform that is itself moving at enormous speed, is humbling in its complexity. But the fundamental insight at the center of all that complexity is simple. If you leave the Earth's surface at precisely the right angle, if you get the initial direction exactly right, the rest of the journey requires only minor adjustments. The vast majority of the distance to Mars is covered by the correctness of that first tiny angle. A deviation of a single degree at launch produces a miss of millions of kilometers at destination. Your financial life obeys the same mathematics. The activity trap is not just expensive in the direct costs of wasted hours and misdirected energy. It is catastrophically expensive in trajectory cost. Every year you spend moving in the wrong direction is a year of compounding you cannot recover. Every year the sawmill is not built is a year of trees uncut. And because compounding accelerates over time, the years you lose at the beginning are worth vastly more than the years you lose at the end. The earlier you escape the activity trap, the more violent the trajectory correction in your favor. The earlier you understand that effort without leverage is just expensive endurance, the more of your compounding years you get to spend in the direction of freedom rather than in the maintenance of servitude. You cannot recover yesterday, but you can correct the angle today. The man I described at the beginning of this video, the one awake at 5:30 and grinding until midnight and still terrified at 50 years old, I see him everywhere. I see him in every generation and every economy and every geography. He's not lazy. He's not stupid. He's not unlucky. He is trapped, and the trap is made entirely of his own effort. The door to the activity trap does not have a lock. It never did. It only requires you to stop running long enough to turn around and see it. Stop. Turn around. Build the machine. That is all. Thanks for watching.